Firefighters, what is the dumbest way you've seen someone accidentally start a house fire? My dad was a firefighter, and he once went to a house fire started by the elderly woman who lived there. She liked to burn candles but didn't like the wax buildup that would form in the cavity, so she would soak up the liquid wax with a napkin. She was doing this when she accidentally brushed a wax-soaked napkin against the flame. She panicked and threw the napkin into the trash where all the other wax-soaked napkins were stored. As the trash can erupted into flames, she fled the house, but not before she went to her oxygen tanks and flooded the house with pure oxygen, thinking it would smother the fire. Yikes, the exact worst thing to possibly do, and I'm guessing they weren't even able to save the house after that move. Story 2. I worked for a restoration company. A family once cut a small tree down and tried to stuff it into their fireplace to burn. The flue was so crammed with leaves that smoke immediately started to fill the living room. When they tried to pull the tree back out, that's when it really caught fire. They attempted to drag the burning tree out of the house but only made it as far as the front door. All of them ended with second and third degree burns on their hands and arms, and the fire destroyed the front room and the entryway of their house. The insurance company asked us if we thought it was a case of fraud, and we told them, nope, these people are just really stupid. Story 3. A fairly common one, but the response was interesting. It was early February in western Pennsylvania on the coldest day of the year, -8 degrees Fahrenheit. A guy's pipes froze and he tried to thaw them with a propane torch, which set the wall on fire. He tried to put it out himself, but failed, finally calling 911. The fire chief was only half a block away and was on scene in under a minute. The basement was already fully involved and the main floor was catching. The first engine arrived in under 5 minutes. Since the doors were blocked by fire, we had to perform an exterior attack only. I was on an attack line, spraying water on the second floor window. After 40 minutes, another firefighter came to relieve me. However, because I'd been getting back spray, I was literally frozen to the ground. He had to pull me loose. 2 hours later, we had it knocked down. When the insurance adjuster showed up, the assistant chief explained what started the fire. The adjuster simply replied, "Oh yeah, we know, it's okay, we insure for stupid." Fortunately, nobody got hurt and the family ended up with a much nicer house out of the deal. Story 4. This wasn't a house fire, but it's a really good one. It was the late 1980s and a guy was driving an old beat-up Lincoln. He turned a corner to go up a steep hill, but the road department had recently ground the asphalt down in preparation for repaving. Consequently, a storm sewer manhole cover was sticking up about 4 inches. As he went over it and headed up the hill, the rear of the car dragged due to the height difference. The manhole cover ripped open his fuel tank and sparked the spilling gasoline. The guy described it this way: "I heard a scraping sound, looked in the mirror, and there was this trail of fire chasing me up the hill like I was the road runner." He pulled into a gravel parking lot and tried to kick a brake in the trail of gas before the fire could reach the car, but the flames jumped up the gap and ignited the vehicle. By the time we arrived, it was a total loss. He actually thought the whole thing was kind of funny. The only real loss was his wife's purse, which contained her license and credit cards. Since the car was insured, they ended up getting a pretty nice payout for it. Story 5. This happened this past fall. A family had a fairy house located outside right next to their wood-sided home. The fairy house was made out of an old tree stump and filled with decorations, including incense and candles. One evening, they decided to light the candles for the fairies, which ignited the dry wood of the stump. The fire then spread to the exterior of the house. Since it started on the outside, it raced up the siding, entered the attic, and moved into the second floor. The family was home at the time but was on the first floor while this was happening. It wasn't until a driver on the road saw the smoke and alerted them that they realized the house was on fire. Luckily, we were able to save the structure. There was significant damage to the roof, attic, and second floor, but the homeowners are currently rebuilding those areas. Story 6. I'm not a firefighter, but I once set my parents' bathroom on fire while getting up from the toilet. My mom used to leave potpourri simmering in a small bowl on the back of the toilet with a tea light candle underneath to heat it. As I was getting up, I somehow knocked the apparatus off the back of the commode. We had carpeted floors in that bathroom and that section of the floor ignited quickly. The fire then found a seam in the wallpaper and ignited the glue quite easily. As the flames rose, they caught the roll of toilet paper on the way up the wall, which really accelerated things. All of this took less than 30 seconds. I remember being almost mesmerized by the path the flames traveled. I realized I had flushed the toilet just before the accident happened. I managed to grab the toilet brush, shove it into the commode to get it wet, and then beat out the flames. The aftermath was surprisingly minimal. A small section of carpet was destroyed, the soot on the wallpaper wiped clean with hot water, and there was only a little permanent smoke damage on the ceiling. Story 7. A family friend decided to undertake major renovations on their home with no background in construction or carpentry. They also didn't consult a professional to ensure the renovations met the fire code. Lo and behold, an exposed wire sparked a fire in the middle of the night and burned down their entire home. They have 3 kids and are very fortunate that they were all able to escape the fire without any injuries. To make matters even worse, they had no homeowners insurance. As extreme libertarians, they didn't believe in insurance or debt, so they had to rely on a GoFundMe fundraiser set up by a relative to recover financially. Last I heard, they were still living in a hotel trying to figure out their next move. This story alone reaffirms my belief that some things are better left to the professionals. Even if you're trying to cut costs, it's best to pay a little extra for someone with experience. It avoids devastating situations like this. Story 8. Firefighter here. One extremely cold night. The temperature was minus 11 degrees Fahrenheit with wind chills in the minus 40s. A guy tried to start a fire in his fireplace and couldn't get it going. He decided to use gasoline, dumping a half-gallon on the firewood stacked by the door and the other half-gallon onto the wood in the fireplace. As he attempted to light it, his lighter wouldn't work. By now, the vapors were really starting to build. He went into the adjoining kitchen to use the stove to light a piece of newspaper. As soon as he turned the knob on the stove, the igniter lit the gasoline vapors. The living room was instantly on fire. The flash singed all his hair, and he suffered first-degree burns on his hands and face. We spent the next few hours working in the extreme cold. Flash forward 3 hours, the firewood outside somehow got ignited and we had to go back. The second fire had time to really grow. It was the middle of the night, everyone was in bed and no one was around. It was the longest, coldest night of my life, all because someone decided to use gasoline to start an indoor fire. Story 9. I'm not a firefighter, but I was living in a large old single-family home that had been converted into 6 apartments. Because it was originally a house, it had a shingle roof. The owner hired an unlicensed and uninsured crew to work on the roof, the kind of workers who wait around for daily labor jobs. Anyway, the guy was on the roof smoking and somehow set it on fire. Rather than dialing 911, he ran down 3 flights of fire escapes, grabbed a garden hose, and ran it back up. Once he got to the top, he realized he had never turned the water on, so he ran back down, turned it on, and ran back up a second time. By that time, the fire was completely out of control, so he just took off. A neighbor finally called 911, but it was already a full-on blaze. It destroyed the top 2 floors and most of the first floor. The moral of the story is, just hire professionals. Story 10. This was the mid-80s, nearing the beginning of my career. A young lady had just finished putting flea spray on her pup when she noticed a tick embedded in its flank. Have you ever heard of that tick removal technique where you blow out a match and touch the hot tip of the tick to make it back out? Yeah. The dog caught on fire. The little fellow ran under the bed, which also ignited. The lady grabbed the pup with her spray-wet hands and they caught on fire as well. Long story short, the house was a mess, but fortunately both the lady and the dog survived with moderate burns. There was also the lady who tried to sanitize her garments in the microwave, but I was off duty that day. Story 11. Once, my neighbor stole 15 propane tanks and decided to make a DIY blowtorch. When I say neighbor, I mean he lived below us. We were letting him stay in our basement. He almost set the house on fire, but he tripped on something and fell over. The next morning, we looked and saw that the floor had burned a little bit, but not much. He was also very intoxicated that day. Another time, we lived in a basement suite and the people above us were making toast at 2 a.m. They used a fork to get the toast out, but the fork hit a heating element, causing the toaster to catch fire. My mom tried to wake me up, but I just pulled my blanket over my head and said, "I just want to sleep a little bit more." Then my mom said the house could burn down and I was suddenly the first one out. Our neighbors forgot they had ferrets inside. We grabbed our dog, but they didn't grab their pets. The fire department arrived, but my neighbors could have put out the fire themselves if they had just unplugged the toaster and put baking soda on it. Story 12. Haha, great story guys, but nothing will top this. So, we were called to a kitchen fire. The lady was out front screaming. We went in and saw fire coming from weird areas in the cabinets. And I kept thinking, how is it in these cabinets? They weren't near the stove. There was no electrical wiring nearby, nothing. We put the fire out quickly. The station was close to the house, so we were on it fast. As the lieutenant, I started asking the homeowner questions. She claimed she had no clue how it started. I prodded further as to why these specific cabinets in a weird area were burning. And she finally said, "I put my oven mitt away in that corner cabinet. It was on fire when I put it there. Could that be it?" Yes, you read that right. She caught her oven mitt on fire and put it away while it was still burning. She didn't see the problem. Story 13. Mr. Homeowner was attempting to deep fry tater tots in a saucepan of oil on a gas stove. The oil frothed up when the frozen tots hit the surface, igniting the whole thing. He then proceeded to grab the pan by the handle and swing it toward the sink. I imagine it was like a Vietnam-era napalm run. He managed to spread the fire across the linoleum floor and, in a panic, let go of the pan, launching the remaining burning oil and tots into a laundry basket full of freshly dried clothes. In the ensuing chaos, he thought he could get the flaming laundry basket out to the back porch. Instead, he knocked the basket off the table and it tumbled straight down the basement chairs, leaving a trail of burning oil-soaked towels all the way down. Now, Mr. Homeowner decides to egress out of the back kitchen door. He missed the stairs, hit his bare right foot on a railing post, breaking a couple of toes, and flew forward, impaling himself on a piece of rebar protruding from a cement block on the patio. And there he stayed, clad only in boxer shorts, having nicked his liver, though he survived and burned his legs badly. The smoke and screams alerted Big Mama, his girlfriend, and 2 teenagers upstairs. The girlfriend made it out by running over the raging fire 1 flight below. She found him on the patio, hurting and turning gray, trying to get off the pike. The teenagers and 2 dogs climbed out of a bedroom window onto a porch roof. The 16-year-old tumbled off and broke his arm. The younger one and the dogs were rescued by neighbors. Mama apparently had a significant cardiac event and collapsed in a junk room, a Collier Brothers-style room filled shoulder high with boxes. By the time we got in, it was a charred, waist-deep mess of black slop. We had to dig her out. It was wretched. The chaos attracted neighbors, including several former bomberos, voluntarios from Guatemala. 2 of them actually saved Mr. Homeowner's life. In 27 years, I have never arrived on a scene of such absolute screaming and chaos. Story 14. I'm not a firefighter, but I was an insurance agent for 10 years and have 2 stories to share. My first client was an elderly, mentally handicapped woman who accidentally burned her apartment building down. She was a bit of a hoarder and had filled the top shelf of her bedroom closet with old newspapers. At some point, she put one of her wigs on top of the newspaper pile right underneath the light bulb, or more accurately, touching the bulb. And the fact that she never turned her closet light off, and there you go. The whole building was gone, though fortunately no one was hurt. The second was a gentleman who was making a large batch of chili. He had it simmering on the stove and went out to mow the lawn. Somehow it boiled over and started a fire between the walls in the kitchen. It burned half the house down, but again, no one was hurt. Story 15. I'm not a firefighter, and technically this didn't start a full house fire, but an ex-friend, you'll understand why he's an ex after reading this, once wanted to find out what would happen if you put paper into a fryer full of oil. I don't know why he wanted to do it or why I was friends with him, but he wouldn't listen to reason. He waited for the oil to heat up and dropped a few drops of water in to make it spit like an angry dragon. When he was satisfied it was hot enough to melt the paper, he dipped in a sheet of A4. It caught fire, obviously. If I hadn't been there, it would have ended so badly, but luckily I knew what to do. I grabbed a towel, ran it under the water, wrung it out, and suffocated the flames. He actually wanted to throw his drink on it. It was right then that I knew I should not spend another minute with this guy. There were scorch marks up the wall and smoke filled the apartment. I just walked out. That was the last time we spoke, almost 15 years ago. Story 16. During my junior year of college, my roommate almost started our house on fire. He had been smoking, dumped the ashes into an empty can, and then threw that can into a paper grocery bag he was using as a garbage bag next to his bed before promptly leaving the house. Thank God I was home. I started smelling smoke that kept getting stronger. I searched the whole house trying to figure out where it was coming from, checking every room except his at first because his door was closed. I called 911, and while I was on the phone with them, I opened his bedroom door. It was entirely filled with smoke, though there was no visible flame. I searched the room while holding my breath, my eyes burning from the smoke, and found the smoldering paper bag. I took it out to the front porch and sprayed it with a garden hose to extinguish it. I'm lucky I was home. If his bed had caught, the whole house would have gone up. Fortunately, there was no real damage done. The fire department still arrived with sirens blaring along with a cop to whom I stupidly admitted my roommate was smoking pot. Officer, what happened here? Me, my roommate was smoking and threw the ashes in a paper garbage bag. Officer, smoking cigarettes? Me, silence. Officer, grass? Me, silent head nod. He just threw his hands in the air, disgusted at the stupidity, and left. The worst part was that I was living in a house that had been in my family for decades. A family member happened to be listening to the fire scanner for fun, heard the address, and called the rest of my family. I got a flurry of panic phone calls. To top it off, my living girlfriend's parents were visiting that morning. They weren't exactly thrilled. Story 17. My brother, who was about 11 at the time, was igniting paper towels by touching them to a red-hot stovetop and then putting them out in the sink. He lit one and brought it into the living room to show me. I was about 5. Most of it had burned by the time he reached me. It was about to burn his hand, so he yelled, "Oh crap," and threw it at me. Obviously, I didn't catch it. It hit the carpet and the fire started spreading. I was going to stomp it out, but he stopped me and shouted, "Wait, I'll get water." He ran off, but I stomped it anyway because the flames were still spreading. The carpet melted, and my brother said, "Here's the plan. Since you stomped it, we'll tell Mom you did all of it." 5-year-old me thought, this is a solid plan. I followed the logic, and there's no other way. Sure enough, I got in huge trouble when my mom came home. I'm 30 now, and to this day, he still swears it was all my fault and that I started the fire. Story 18. I'm not a firefighter, but after my sister had been living in her first apartment for about a month, we had a huge snowstorm. She bought some manufactured fire logs like Duraflame to save on heat. She put one in the fireplace and tried to light it, but it never really caught fire, it just smoldered. Disappointed, she shut the flue, closed the glass doors, and went to bed. She woke up in the middle of the night to find her apartment filled with thick smoke. In a panic, she grabbed the smoldering log from the fireplace and tossed it onto her snowy wooden balcony. In the morning, she discovered the log had burned a hole through her balcony and the one directly below it. If you look through the hole, you could see the log sitting on the patio 2 floors below her. Story 19. I was a firefighter, but this story is actually, well, about me. I found an old alcohol-fueled camp stove and wanted to see if it still worked or if the jets were blocked. I put it on the kitchen counter and noticed there was still a little fuel in the reservoir. I tried to light it, but nothing happened. I assumed there wasn't enough fuel, so I grabbed a bottle of methylated spirits, denatured alcohol, and started to fill it up. It turns out, of course, that alcohol burns with a nearly clear flame, and it had been alight the whole time. The bottle of metho turned into a flamethrower, spraying burning alcohol all over the kitchen. Fortunately, I keep a fire extinguisher in the kitchen and was able to put it out before any real damage occurred. However, I was cleaning up dry powder from that extinguisher for months. Story 20. My mom was a firefighter in her early 30s. One day, she got an emergency call. I think our neighbor's house is on fire and the people inside aren't responding. The crew immediately rushed to the destination. The house looked fine from the outside except for a lot of smoke pouring out of the windows. They knocked on the door, but no one responded at first. Finally, they called out to see if anyone was inside, and the conversation went like this. Firefighters. Hello, is anyone inside? There's smoke coming out of your house. A boy's voice. Who are you? Are you my mama's friends here to help me with my dish? Firefighters. Yeah, we are. Open the door and let us in. Boy. The door's open. Come on in. And what they saw was unbelievable. There was a kid lying on the sofa watching TV and waving at them while a pan on the gas stove was actively burning. They extinguished the fire and asked the kid what he was doing. He said he was trying to make Chinese food he saw on TV. He thought that firing the dish was the secret to making it delicious. And if you're enjoying the video, hopefully learning a thing or two of what not to do, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 21. I'm not a firefighter, but I've caught the kitchen on fire a few times, which is the reason my husband now requires 2 fire extinguishers within easy reach at all times. We used to have one of those glass flat top stoves. So one morning I made coffee and set the coffee pot on the stove before hopping in the shower. When we got out, the kitchen was covered in thick white smoke. It turns out that when I put the pot down, I had pushed it a little too far back and bumped the knob just enough to turn the burner on. We had a 3-foot flame. Luckily, my husband was able to put it out with some water. The kitchen smelled like burnt plastic for days. Since then, we've also had a Pop-Tart catch fire in the toaster, and my daughter accidentally left a hand towel on the stove. Even though the burner was barely on it, it was enough to ignite the fabric. This actually happened on 2 different occasions. We don't have a flat top stove anymore, and I never intend to get another one. It's much too easy to treat it like extra counter space when it's not in use. Story 22. I'm not a firefighter, but I was an apartment manager. So one day, I suddenly heard screaming and smelled smoke. I ran outside and saw smoke billowing from the apartment next to mine. I had keys to every unit, but when I tried the door, I found it was unlocked. The smoke was coming from the kitchen. The tenant, a middle-aged woman who liked deep-fried foods, had put a pot half filled with oil on the stove and turned the heat to high. Apparently, it was taking a while to heat up, so she decided to lie down for a few minutes to rest, and of course, she fell asleep. The vapors coming off the hot oil had ignited. I turned off the flame and used pot holders to scoot the pan over to an unpowered burner. As I was yelling to see if anyone was in the smoke-filled apartment, I noticed the flames had gone down, so I took the pot of boiling oil outside and set it on the sidewalk. The woman finally woke up from the noise looking completely confused. Story 23. I was a volunteer firefighter for 15 years, and these are all calls I personally responded to. The candle vigil. There was a power outage, and this lady legitimately lit 400 candles, distributing them throughout the house. She placed about 40 of them along the floorboards near the kitchen cabinets. The particle board countertops caught fire, but we kept it to room and contents. The husband arrived home during overhaul. It was difficult to keep a straight face while she screamed at him for not buying her marble countertops. We had just extinguished the candles at the base of the bed too. I'm still not sure how the countertops caught, but the sheets didn't. The barn rocket. Teenagers were running around the field shooting bottle rockets at each other. No one got hit, but one went into the barn and there goes the hay. The Buick recall. A guy received a recall notice for his Buick with the supercharged 3.8-liter engine. The well-known recall for spontaneous combustion. He figured since he took good care of his car, he was fine. He should have obeyed the instructions to park that car outside. The reloading room. Never light cigarettes while reloading ammunition. I will not go near your house until the ammo is done cooking off. The fire will be in the basement before the popping stops. My deck gun will keep your neighbor somewhat safe, but your place is done. The propane transfer. Just because a cheap tool shop sells a coupling to move propane between tanks doesn't mean you should use it. Definitely don't use it in your basement or refill 20 tanks in a row with the windows closed. Eventually, it'll go boom. It won't last long, but you won't have windows anymore, and that helicopter ride is expensive. Story 24. I'm not a firefighter, but I once accidentally left the 2 dumber roommates out of 8 at home together. They got some white gas to play with and filled a mason jar with it. They took the jar out to the porch and placed it on a cantilevered platform at one end of a coffee table made of Falstaff beer cans and shag carpeting. On the raised platform at the other end of the table, they placed a styrofoam cup, filled it with white glass, and lit it on fire. Apparently, they had never read the anarchist cookbook or made homemade napalm before because the cup dissolved instantly. Now they had one end of a shag carpeted coffee table on fire. This is where it gets good. One of the idiots realized they had definitely messed up and tried to stamp out the fire. There were 2 major problems with this plan. They had accidentally made a napalm paste, so when you stomp on it, it doesn't go out. Instead, your shoe sole catches fire and you end up jumping around like a moron, spreading flaming footprints all over the porch. They had placed the open mason jar of white gas on the other end of the cantilever table. When the roommate stomped on the fiery end, the table acted like a seesaw. The mason jar launched into the air toward the flames, smashed, and immediately ignited the entire porch floor. I don't know how, but they managed to mostly extinguish it by the time the fire truck showed up. But the flea market table was ruined. I love that stupid table. And for the record, these weren't rednecks, just very stoned students at a prestigious public university. Story 25. I have a rather ironic story. My older sister is currently in the fire academy and has wanted to be a firefighter nearly her whole life. I actually found out today that she passed and will be one soon. However, she didn't used to be very fire smart, so she loves scented candles. A couple of years before she got into the academy, I noticed a strange, acrid smell coming out of her room. I went in and asked if she knew what it was. She just shrugged, but when I looked at her dresser, I noticed a candle sitting inside a small basket. The basket promptly caught on fire. The handle had been slowly smoldering for a while. The smell was coming from a finish or oil used to treat the wood. It was an expensive, collectible basket. I had to quickly grab the basket from the side that wasn't burning yet, run to the bathroom, throw it into the tub, and douse it with a shower nozzle. If I hadn't been there, her room probably would have been scorched or worse. I still haven't let her live that one down. Story 26. My dad, and hero, was a firefighter for 30 years. He had a lot of great stories. Here are 2. The honeymoon flashover. During his last week before retiring, he got a call involving a man and his new wife who had just returned from their honeymoon. They had put their lawnmower and yard tools in the basement for safekeeping during their trip. The husband went downstairs and hopped on to drive the mower outside. Gas fumes had built up in the basement while they were away, so when he started the mower, the fire flashed over. The house was a total loss except for the refrigerator in the garage, which had plenty of beer to toast their epic return. The crying trucks. The crew was called to a garage fire in a rural part of the district. It was a large detached garage and the fire likely started from a blowtorch. The trucks arrived and the crew started running lines after the owner confirmed no one was inside. A bit later, the owner ran over because he'd forgot to mention there were tanks of flammable gases inside. My dad had everyone drop back fast. An explosion followed and the heat was so intense that the light corners on all the trucks parked near the garage melted. He said it looked like the trucks were crying. Thank God there were no injuries or casualties, only the crying trucks. Story 27. This isn't my story, but my friend's dad used to tell us his firefighter stories. One day, he responded to a call where a shed had fallen on a woman. The crew arrived and helped her. She didn't have any major injuries, so they asked if she wanted to go to the hospital. She refused. Perfectly normal, right? Well, a few hours later, they got another call to the same address, this time for a 2-alarm fire. Once they arrived, the lady whom the crew had rescued earlier started flirting with my friend's dad. He began asking questions. When he asked how the fire started, she told him she did it because she wanted to see his, quote, handsome firefighter face again. She was later charged with arson and destruction of property as the fire had spread to the house next door. Believe it or not, she actually called her insurance company to get money to pay her bail. They sent an insurance agent to talk to my friend's father, who confirmed it was arson. So not only did she commit 2 counts of arson and destruction of property, but she added insurance fraud to the list. Story 28. I'm not a firefighter, but I can think of 2 examples. The first was shared by a fire department representative during a work training seminar. It took place in an apartment shared by 3 exchange students. One was at work, one was sleeping, student B, and the third, student A, was in the kitchen. Student A decided to deep fry something. He set a pot of oil on the stove on high, then got distracted by a movie in the living room. When the apartment filled with smoke, he went to check on the oil. He turned down the heat and added his food to the pot, which caused the oil to splatter and smoke even more. Student A decided to consult Google, then returned, picked up the pot, and then put it under the kitchen faucet. Never do this. The resulting splatter and smoke scorched the counters and cupboards. Panicked, student A moved the pot to the middle of the kitchen floor and woke up student B, who ran to a neighbor for help. Because of his frantic nature and language barrier, the neighbor struggled to understand him, but she eventually called the fire department and pointed the students toward a fire extinguisher. Neither student knew how to use it, but fortunately, another neighbor stepped in to help. Story 29. Not a house fire, but definitely really stupid and worth talking about. A few years ago, some idiot teenager threw firecrackers into a dry bush in the Columbia Gorge during a dry summer when fires weren't even allowed. If you don't know what the Columbia Gorge is, it's a massive canyon through the Cascade Mountain Range. Since Eastern Oregon and Washington are highland desert, it's also a massive wind tunnel that regularly gets 100-mile-per-hour wind gusts. Also, the gorge is in the middle of a pine forest. Yeah, this went about as well as you'd expect. The fire was massive and incredibly devastating to a natural historic site. It gets worse. Portland, Oregon is literally on the Columbia Gorge, so part of the Portland metro area was on evacuation notice, and the entire city was full of smoke for months. They never released the kid's name for obvious reasons. Locals probably would have literally ended him. He got his punishment though, the little crap. Eagle Creek Fire was the name of the incident if you want to read up on it. Story 30. I'm not a firefighter, but this incident was a very close call. We were teenagers with extra time on our hands in the summer, and one of our favorite things to do after a day at the beach was make homemade French fries. We had done this numerous times and had a solid idea of how to not mess it up. While we were waiting for our first batch to cook, since there was only so much room in the pot, my friend's older brother came home. He was about 15 or 16, stoned as heck, and very interested in our fries. He noticed that not all of the fries were in the pot and immediately yelled, "Well, why aren't you cooking them all?" He promptly dumped the rest of the fires into the pot of boiling oil as we screamed, "No!" And the second those fries hit the oil, it boiled over. The stove caught fire and the flames shot almost to the ceiling. Everyone panicked and my friend screamed, "Is it baking soda or baking powder you use to put out grease fires?" We grabbed the first one we could find. Baking soda was the correct choice. Guess which one we grabbed? Luckily, we found a metal lid to smother the flames. Because we acted so quickly, we saved the kitchen from being destroyed, no thanks to the older brother who just stood there laughing with his friend. We cleaned up the mess and figured we were home free. However, because we were so short, we didn't notice the burn marks on the top of the hood fan. We ended up having to explain everything to her mom, and we weren't allowed to cook fries after that. Story 31. Christmas 2019, I was cooking a turkey on the grill and at the same time using my fire pit to burn old papers instead of shredding them. I was done with the fire pit by 3 p.m., maybe earlier. After dinner and presents around 6:30 p.m., I dumped the ashes into a compost trash can near the house so I could put the fire pit in the garage. I didn't want to leave it out in the elements. The compost bin had dry leaves on top and I didn't put the lid back on. An hour later, it started smoldering. 5 minutes after that, the flames were going. Within 30 minutes, the trash can was completely melted and gone. The hose reel next to it was also melted and burning, and the hose itself was on fire. I happened to look out the kitchen window and saw flickering lights. Wondering why, I stuck my head up for a closer look and saw flames. I ran outside to hook up the hose only to realize it was already damaged by the heat. I knocked over the flaming compost pile, threw the hose reel away from the house, and turned on the spigot. Since I had no hose, I started splashing water directly onto the house where the masonite boards were slowly burning. Thankfully, they didn't ignite easily or the whole house might have gone up. My wife and kids ran out and started a bucket brigade from the kitchen. I ended up using a bathroom trash can as a bucket to put most of the fire out. The fire department arrived and double-checked to make sure everything was okay. It cost $2,000 to put new siding on that wall. I saw a similar story the next day, but that family lost their house because they had vinyl siding. Christmas 2019 will be the year my kids remember forever as the year Dad almost burned the house down. I didn't sleep much that night, thinking about how bad it could have been. I know the exact timing because I caught most of it on my garden web camera. I'm one lucky son of a witch. Story 32. My uncle is a fire chief and has been on the force since before I was born, so my family knows and follows all the safety rules. We weren't even allowed to have candles in the house, yet we went through 3 house fires in just over a year. First fire, it was the middle of the night and we were finishing a load of laundry. The rubber foam insulation had shaken loose in the back of the dryer, exposing the wires and metal and catching the wall on fire. The house was completely engulfed in under 10 minutes. We lost all of our belongings and 2 pets to smoke inhalation. Second fire, we moved into a new house. We spent 2 months renovating and had recessed lighting installed. A mistake was made and a connection in the attic arsed 4 months after we moved in. The attic was a complete loss, but most of our things were salvageable. Save for some smoke and water damage, we were planning to rebuild. Third fire, same house. The city utilities never turned the electricity off. The house caught fire again while no one was there. Our neighbor saw it and called it in. All of our furniture and the house were lost. We were investigated for insurance fraud, which was fair considering it was 3 fires in 15 months. We were found innocent, but we lost our insurance and had to move in with my brother because no company would insure us for a year. Now, our family motto is, at least nothing caught fire, and we keep fire extinguishers in every room of the house. Story 33. The fire marshal actually didn't cite this as the cause, but I may or may not have burned down my house while intoxicated, using WD-40 and a lighter to end roaches on the back porch. I passed out, and a couple of hours later, the place was completely engulfed. My brother ran into the downstairs, screaming to wake me up. It was a total loss. Any fans of the movie Rounders? There's a scene where the characters get invited to a municipal game, and it turns out to be cops. Well, about 4 years after my house burned down, my buddy and I got invited to a municipal game. Fortunately, it was firefighters. My buddy cleaned them out, and needless to say, we were never invited back. The interesting part is that a couple of those firefighters had worked the fire at my house and remembered it. It's in an area where things like that don't happen often, so it stood out. What they said was common, however, was finding elderly people on the toilet. Apparently, they get that call all the time at retirement homes. They also talked about working a plane crash I was familiar with. It was a small aircraft with just 2 people on board. They said the pilot knew he was gone, so he nosedived the plane right between a school and an apartment building to avoid ending anyone on the ground. They described the recovery as fitting in a 5-gallon bucket. Story 34. I worked on a restoration project that was basically a total rebuild of 2 townhome units that had burned out entirely. There were 2 more attached units that the fire department managed to save. The tenants of the end unit decided to have a barbecue. As the coals were burning down, it started to rain. This genius decided they weren't giving up so easily and moved the BBQ right outside the large sliding glass door so they could cook from inside the house. They then proceeded to lean a twin-size mattress against the house at an angle to act as a sort of roof to keep the rain off the grill. And needless to say, it didn't go well. These people burned out half of a large 4-unit, 2-story townhome complex simply because they were reckless. Thankfully, no one was seriously injured. Story 35. I'm not a firefighter, but I'm the guy who used to come in afterward to bid on and handle the rebuild. I did fire restoration, mold remediation, and water damage insurance work about 17 years ago. So anyway, I pulled up to this beautiful stone mansion, 11,000 square feet of gorgeous ridiculousness. I went in through the basement garage, and the place was charred to the point that I could look up and see parts of the 3 floors above me. As I walked through, I saw one of those grand staircases that wound up from the front entry. I found out the owner was a neurosurgeon at a nearby hospital. I started talking to the fire marshal on site and he told me what had happened. Apparently, the neurosurgeon decided he wanted to refinish his hardwood floors himself. He started stripping them and using rags to soak up the excess stain and old finish. When he was done for the day, he figured he'd save the rags for later and threw them into a black plastic trash bag. He then stored the bag in the closet under the stairs before leaving for work. The chemicals in the bag eventually ignited and things got, well, spicy. The company I worked for ended with $4 million from his insurance company. I never saw that job finish, but I remember being so incredibly irritated that something so gorgeous and historic burned up for such a stupid reason. Story 36. I still remember the exact date, December 25th, 1999, Christmas Day, an undisclosed location in northern Wisconsin. It was about 10:30 a.m. We rolled up first due to a house with charged smoke blowing out the Bravo side windows and billowing from under the structure. A man was rushing in and out of the front door on the other side of the house, maniacally throwing things into the yard, presents, clothes, furniture. The wife was standing by the car screaming, "No, no!" At first, we were amped up. Seeing bikes and toys without any kids outside, combined with the mom screaming and the dad freaking out, made us afraid that this was a much more sinister event. Fortunately, it turned out the kids were at their grandparents' house. The cause? In order to thaw his pipes, Mr. Genius had gone into the crawl space with a propane torch. There isn't much to explain there. It was a dry, low humidity environment, and when it's that cold, When it's that cold, suspended moisture freezes and dries the air out, which is why people get more nosebleeds in winter. The dust and cobwebs took off immediately. He was lucky to get out of the crawl space before the smoke took him. Story 37. When I was about 10 years old, my family went on a camping trip and left our elderly roommate home alone. He decided to fry some chicken, but instead of using the deep fryer we had on the counter, he filled a flimsy aluminum camping pan with oil. He then turned off all the lights and went to take a shower, leaving the burner on. Thankfully, our neighbors were home and smelled smoke. They came to investigate and found him in the kitchen with a garden hose on full blast, putting out the fire. Flames were already shooting out of the pan and had been melting the microwave for about 20 minutes. However, the moment the water hit the oil, fire engulfed all the kitchen cabinets as well. Additionally, there was significant water damage throughout the house. The living room, dining room, kitchen, and part of the hallway were covered in several inches of water. Story 38. I'm not a firefighter, but I've seen some incredibly stupid behavior. In Germany, a guy digging for road construction hit a city gas line with a backhoe. The resulting fire melted everything within a 3-block radius. Then there was a guy in Pennsylvania who was filling garbage cans with chemicals and putting them in the back of his station wagon to take to a campground. On his way there, investigators think static electricity ignited the bags. It blew the car up so violently that you could see the stamp of the car's undercarriage embedded in the tar and chip road for years afterward. I also know of a kid who tried to burn out a mouse nest in his family's 400-head dairy barn. Then there was a guy at a military range who laid a cherry red M250 caliber barrel directly onto his rucksack. Finally, a grown woman was pouring alcohol into her sink and lighting it on fire. It stayed in the sink at first, but it eventually burned through the PVC pipes underneath and burned the entire house down. And if any of these stories got to you, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.